Hello, and welcome to IMA's CMA Candidate Webinar Series. The title of today's presentation is The CMA Exam Essays, Everything You Need to Know, sponsored by Gleim CMA Review. I'm Margaret Lockery, and I'll be your host for today's CMA Candidate Webinar. Before we begin, I would like to thank our sponsor, Gleim CMA Review, for their support with today's webinar. Gleim CMA, an IMA strategic partner, set the standard with the first CMA course almost 40 years ago and has been innovating the exam prep industry ever since. The Gleim CMA review system includes access to Smart Adapt, Gleim's adaptive learning platform designed to ensure you succeed the first time. This groundbreaking platform identifies where you need to focus and where you don't, and provides guidance so you can achieve mastery of exam concepts. Gleim covers all of the ICMA's learning outcome statements with expert-led videos, comprehensive and expertly offered digital and physical books, audio lectures, and signature answer explanations from the most realistic test bank of multiple choice and essay questions. All of this is backed by Gleim's Access Until You Pass guarantee and unparalleled personal support. Gleim equips you with everything you need to pass the CMA exam with confidence. Before turning the presentation over to today's moderator, I would like to quickly review some important information about today's event. Please use the Q&A window on the right side of your screen to send questions to our presenters or to request assistance with any technical difficulty. Keep in mind that refreshing your browser will correct most connection issues. To access the closed captioning feature, please click the closed captioning icon in the lower right section of your media player on the left side of your screen. It's a pleasure to have Tyler Skelton as part of our program, and he will be serving as moderator for today's event. Tyler is a business development manager for IMA, primarily focused on academic and student members. Hi, Tyler. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Margaret. I'm pleased to be a part of the CMA Candidate Webinar Series, and on behalf of IMA, I want to welcome everyone to today's session. I'd first like to introduce Mitra Kleinberg as our first featured presenter for this program. Mitra is a manager of strategic corporate partnerships at IMA, and she works with companies to create awareness of the benefits of membership in a professional association, as well as earning the Certified Management Accountant credential. Hi, Mitra. Welcome to the program.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Next, I would like to introduce you to our second featured presenter for today's program, Sue Mullen. Sue Mullen is a professional instructor at Ashland University. She teaches various levels of accounting that include managerial, financial, intermediate, advanced cost management, as well as CMA review classes. Sue has worked in both public accounting and industry. She earned a Bachelor of Arts from Baldwin Wallace College and an MBA from Ashland University. Sue is a CMA and CSCA and a member of IMA. She's also a CPA in the state of Ohio and a member of the AICPA, as well as the Ohio Society of CPAs. It's great to have you with us, Sue.
Thanks, Tyler. It's a pleasure to be part of today's program.
I would also like to introduce our guest speaker for today's program, Catherine Crum. Catherine has over 20 years of experience in managerial accounting, including budgeting, controlling, and forecasting with major consumer goods and pharmaceutical companies such as Bristol-Myers Squibb, Pfizer, Unilever, and Hologic. She is currently a senior finance manager at Takeda Oncology. Catherine earned a BS in accounting from the University of Hartford and an MBA from University of Connecticut. It's great to have you with us, Catherine.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Before turning the presentation over to our speaker, I would like to go over the learning objectives for today's program. After participating in this webinar, you will understand the CMA exam format. You should also be able to explain how the essay responses are graded. You will recognize how to maximize your point earning potential on the CMA exam essay questions. And finally, you will know how to manage your time on the essay portion of the exam. We're looking forward to an informative presentation. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mitra to begin.
Great, thank you. And looking at the agenda here, we are going to start off with the CMA exam structure. Then we'll go into tips for answering essay questions. Sample essay questions and responses will be discussed. Then steps to becoming a CMA, and we'll go into questions and a discussion. So again, utilize that Q&A box if you can, to type in your questions now, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. So let's dive right into the CMA exam structure. This is a nice high-level overview. You can see the CMA exam is comprised of 2 parts, testing your fluency in both accounting and finance. Exams are each 4 hours in length, starting with 100 multiple choice questions and concluding with 2 essay scenarios, which are like mini cases. The exam parts can be taken in any order, so you don't have to start with part 1. This slide provides a high-level overview of the test topics. More details are available on the IMA website, so definitely check that out. You can see that the Part 1 exam is called Financial Planning, Performance, and Analytics, and it has 6 sections. The first section focuses on external financial reporting decisions, and it covers financial accounting topics such as different financial statements and topics related to recognition, measurement, valuation, and disclosure. The next 3 sections, planning, budgeting, and forecasting, performance management, and cost management, cover topics that I'm sure many of you perform in your jobs on a daily basis, or you've seen your managerial or cost accounting classes in the university level. This includes topics such as the budgeting process, variance analysis, balanced scorecard, job order costing, activity-based costing, etc. The 5th section covers best practices and internal controls. The final section, and the most recent addition to the CMA exam, is called Technology and Analytics. This section covers content related to accounting information systems, including topics such as data governance, technology enablement, and data analytics. The Part 2 exam is called Strategic Financial Management. It has 6 sections, and you'll see that it includes some finance topics. So Part 1 is a little more accounting heavy, and Part 2 is a little more finance heavy. Financial statement analysis focuses on financial ratios. So you have your liquidity, profitability, turnover, etc. You're expected to calculate the ratios and interpret them. For example, how is your company trending over time? How does it compare to competitors in the industry? Corporate finance focuses on risk and return models and financial instruments. Decision analysis covers things like variable and fixed costs, cost volume profit analysis, and contribution margin income statements. Risk management focuses on enterprise risk management. Companies need to be prepared to manage risks by identifying them and creating plans to defer, transfer, or even avoid them. So very important. The investment decision section covers capital budgeting techniques like discounted cash flow methods and other ways to evaluate investments for an organization. And finally, the last section focuses on professional ethics. Ethics is such an important topic to the IMA, as well as the profession in general. We cover IMA statement on ethical professional practice in this exam section. So as you can see, the content covered on the CMA exam is very relevant. If you were to show this list of topics to a senior leader in finance or accounting, they would tell you that they need employees who have mastery of these skills. I hear it all the time. So let's dive into the exam structure now. Okay, let's talk about the scoring specifically. The weighing of the 2 exam parts is based on the relative amount of time spent on each part. So you'll be spending about 3 out of the 4 hours on the multiple choice questions. And as a result, about 75% of your exam score will come from the multiple choice section. Likewise, about 25% of your exam score will come from your performance on the essay section. When you complete the multiple choice section of the exam, the computer will be checking to see if you earned at least 50% on the first section of the exam. If you did earn at least 50%, then you'll proceed to the essay portion of the exam. You won't learn what your score on the multiple choice section was, you'll just know that you earned 50% or higher. If you haven't answered at least 50% of the multiple choice questions correctly, then the test will end at that time for you. Remember that once you leave the multiple choice section of the exam and advance to the essay section, you will not be able to return to the multiple choice section again. So, although the focus of this webinar is on the essay portion, I would like to mention that you can find complimentary practice quiz for multiple choice questions on the IMA website. You will receive 10 randomly selected questions from a retired bank of CMA practice questions. This is a good way to test your skills and expertise, and your score will show at the end. So definitely check that out. You should also mark your calendars for October 25th, which is when we'll be hosting a separate CMA Candidate webinar series that focuses on navigating multiple choice questions. If you're an IMA member, you can also view recordings of all past candidate webinars in our archives. Just visit the Education Center on the IMA website. Now let's talk about exam strategy, very important. So what does it take to pass the CMA exam? Everyone wants to know that, right? Obviously, you need to have knowledge. That means that you're spending time reviewing and studying the content that will be tested on the CMA exam. Very important to put in the time. You'll also want to try to remain confident throughout your preparation period, as well as during the exam itself. Try to remain positive and tell yourself that you can be successful on the exam. Negative thoughts will only hinder you. Keep in mind that the more prepared you are for the exam, the more confident you'll feel, and as a result, you'll feel less stressed when taking the exam. Another strategy that I recommend is to manage your time well during the exam. For example, you'll want to have a strategy that you use during the multiple choice sections of the exam, which ensures that you are able to read through and answer all 100 of the multiple choice questions while still leaving enough time for the essays. For the essay portion of the exam, you'll also need to use your time as effectively and efficiently as possible. And finally, probably the most important thing a CMA candidate needs to have is commitment. This is a very challenging exam. You'll need to commit yourself to studying and following through to reach your goal to become a CMA. So don't be afraid of the essay section on the CMA exam. I know everyone gets nervous when they're taking the exam in general. And the essay section seems to create more anxiety than the multiple choice section for a lot of CMA candidates. So if you feel that way, you're not alone. Okay. Keep in mind that the essay portion of the exam provides a great opportunity to earn partial credit. That means that you can earn points even if you don't get the answer to the question correct. That isn't possible on the multiple choice section. Okay, so take advantage of this. Now, in order to earn partial credit, you'll need to be sure to show your work as well as your assumptions. For example, let's say you're asked to calculate the break-even point in a problem, and you simply type a number in the essay response box. If you made a mistake in your calculations and the grader can only see the number that you typed, then you will not earn any points for your response. However, if you type in your assumptions and your calculations, which will show how you arrived at a certain number, the grader may be able to award you a few points for the steps that you correctly completed. So it's really important to show your assumptions, calculations, and anything else that will help your grader understand how you arrived at your response. There are 2 essay scenarios or problems on the CMA exam, and each of them will have between 4 and 7 questions associated with them. So you could have anywhere from 8 to 14 questions to answer within the 1-hour time frame allotted to the essay portion of the exam. I recommend that when you start the essay portion of the exam, you take a look at each of the 2 essay scenarios to see what type of topics they cover. You'll also want to look at the questions associated with each scenario to determine which ones require simple responses and which ones will require more time. Doing an initial assessment like this will help you manage your time. So now let's hear a few tips for your essay responses, okay? First, you'll want to pay very close attention to what you're being asked to do. For example, if a question is asking you to compare or contrast something, then you don't want to simply provide a definition. Make sure that you answer the question that is being asked. Be sure to read the question in its entirety so that you understand everything that you're being asked to do. Keep in mind that you may be a bit nervous, and that's totally fine, but you'll want to be careful that you stay focused and read through the requirements very carefully. Candidates will be awarded points, remember, for the quality of their responses on each of the 2 essay scenarios in each part. You'll need to ensure that the response you provide is relevant in the question that is being asked. Specifically, graders are looking to see that candidates communicate their thoughts in a well-organized, thorough, and clear manner, and that they demonstrate their knowledge and ability in applying concepts appropriately and accurately. I know you're thinking it, so I'm just going to say it. There is no spell check, okay? Not to worry, the exam is no longer graded for grammar and spelling. However, the better written correct response will certainly be better understood by the graders and thus improve your overall score. When responding to the essay question, you want to be thorough in your response so that the graders can award you as many points as possible. While some people prefer to type the response in full sentences and paragraphs, it's also perfectly acceptable to include some bullet points in your responses. I recommend that you try to answer every single question that's presented to you. If you're running short on time, then at least try to type a few key points or create an outline of your response. Again, this is an example of how you can try to earn partial credit for your response. Remember, when the exam graders are reviewing your responses, they're trying to give you points. They're not trying to take them away from you. Try to respond to the question with as much relevant detail as possible so that you make it easy for the grader to award points to you. Sue will give some good examples of how this is done in a few minutes. Before I hand it over to Sue to show you some actual essay questions and responses, I'd like to explain how you'll input your response in the essay portion of the exam. Okay? At Prometric, you'll have access to a simple text box on the screen where you'll type in your response to each question. Keep in mind that the text box does not have as much functionality as Microsoft Word. It's pretty basic. You'll have about 1 hour to complete the essay portion of the exam, and you'll probably need all of the time to answer each question thoroughly. If you finish and find that you have a few minutes remaining, then use the time to review your response or add more details, etc. Here's a sample screenshot of an essay question, as it'll look on the screen at the Prometrics testing centers, or if you're taking it remotely, it'll look on your screen at home. On the left pane or side of your screen is the essay scenario. This is the situation you're analyzing. Then the right pane is where you see the specific question and the area where you type your response. In this screenshot, you're looking at question number 3. Remember, you have 2 essay scenarios, and each scenario could have 4 to 7 questions. The total test time remaining is displayed above the question. As you can see, it's circled here as a visual. The specific question is, identify 3 possible synergies or benefits of mergers and acquisitions. On the question pane, you have the time value tables available if you need them for your question, as well as the calculator. Then on the bottom right, you have the same flag, back and next buttons you saw on the multiple choice questions. The back and next buttons allow you to move back and forward within the essay scenario. So before we move on to Sue's sample CMA essay questions, I would like to have Catherine Crum share some insights with you. Catherine earned the CMA in 2020, and I think you'll benefit from hearing about her experience with the CMA certification. So welcome, Catherine. Thank you for being here. And please start off by telling us why you decided to become a CMA in the first place.
Thank you, Mitra, and hello to everyone. Catherine and of CMA. And as you remember from the introduction, I have had over 20 years of experience doing managerial accounting. And yet I still decided to obtain the designation of the CMA because of the 2 reasons. The first one is personal growth. I believe learning is a lifelong journey. So I'm not going to stop just because after 20 years, something I already have enough experience. particularly with the dynamic changes in the business world today. It is good that I can keep up with things that are changed and remain a good business partner to my colleagues at Takeda, which led me to the second reason. The second reason is I really wanted to contribute not only my knowledge, but also the value added to the finance function at Takeda supporting the oncology business. I'm working with, I always impressed with the intelligence of my colleagues who are scientists, they are pharmacists, they are so brilliant, they can come up with drugs to cure cancer. So at least I should do my part of how to help them, achieve their goals of trying to come up with a new drug and launch successfully. And for that, it requires not only the experience, but also the professional credibility, which I think the CMA is like a perfect designation. I hope that helps everyone. Mitra?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you mentioned the fact that, you're a lifelong learner, which is a big part of the CMA, because once you become certified, you do have to maintain your certification with continued education every year as well.
Yes.
And the business partner aspect too is very important. So that's great. Can you go into some details on your study process specifically for the exam and any advice you have for the attendees?
Yes, sure. So some of the methods or the process I follow, I pretty much learn from the programs that I bought and study, right? And I think you would find that in each of the programs or the company that publish it, they would tell you and the discipline of keeping up with the program. So that's what I do. I prepare a schedule and I try to stick with it. So, and then being an accountant, I have a spreadsheet to keep up of the green, meaning I already mastered the skill set or whatnot, and the red, meaning I still need to learn some more. So I just glance at that schedule, and if I have conflicts, or sometimes the demand of my day job requires that I cannot study for like a week or so, then the following week when I pick up, I would try to study with longer hours and making sure that I keep up with that. So that was like one of the things that I try to follow. And that is part of like the discipline also that you would learn in order for you to be successful in passing the exam. It requires that you keep up with the material every day, in my view. And I find that when I was away for like a week or so, it takes some time to actually remember what I did a week ago. So I think it's good to keep up with the schedule, being disciplined on what you do. To your schedule. And I think once you learn and you adapt that kind of like the personal discipline, you can also apply that in career, and that's going to make you a better professional, and a more successful finance, with the designation.
That's great. Thank you. And do you have any general advice for the attendees on how to tackle the exam, or things maybe you would have done differently the second time around?
Yes, of course. So I think we all are very distracted with everything else, right? Have a career or the other classes. If you are still students, that you need to keep up a normal life with family and commitments that you need to make. So sometimes it gets distraction. So I myself, if I have to do it again, I probably would not try to schedule the exam during the holidays, because that was one of my mistakes. I thought, oh, it's Christmas and I should have some time off from work and I can study. And it is the opposite, because then everyone gather around the holidays and I feel guilty if I went upstairs to study. So I have to spend time with them. So yeah, so if I have to do it again, I probably will give my time, the kind of like a break during that holiday break, and not committed to the exam.
Great, thank you. And it is recommended to spend about 100, 150 hours of study time per part of the exam. So you definitely want to space it out. And great. Thank you so much. Well,
you're welcome.
Yes. And Catherine will stick around till the end. So if you have specific questions for her, again, you can utilize that Q&A box, and we'll get to that at the end.
Thank you.
Great.
Good luck, everyone.
So we really appreciate you sharing your experiences. And now we're going to hand the presentation over to Sue, who will take you through some sample essay questions.
Thank you so much, Catherine. So inspirational to know that at any point in our lives we can attack this exam. This is a rigorous exam, so I always encourage my students who are undergraduate to take it as soon as possible, but I was one of those students who was already into my career quite a bit, and then I decided to take the CMA. So different routes for everybody, but let's get back into what we're going to talk about today. So Mitra had provided some tips on answering the essay questions earlier in the presentation. So at this time, I would like to integrate those tips while reviewing 2 sample essays. The first essay we will review is a qualitative essay that is focused on ethical conflict. There are 3 questions to our first sample essay. Before we begin looking at the questions, though, let's quickly review or skim the scenario. The scenario is where you will gather the relevant data necessary to answer the questions. I encourage CMA candidates to approach essay questions in this order. Skim the scenario, then review the question requirements, and then go back and reread the scenario, noting the information that is relevant to the questions being asked. I suggest this because there's often going to be information that's not necessary. I call these distractors, and at first glance, the information may appear that it is relevant to the question, but they are in fact unnecessary. So let's read the actual scenario now. Alex Romanov is a management accountant at Carroll Mining and Manufacturing Company, which is also going to be known as CMMC as we proceed through this example. They are a large processor of ores and minerals. While working late one night to complete the footnotes for the financial statements, Romanov was looking for a file in his supervisor's office and noticed a report regarding procedures for disposing of plant waste. According to the handwritten notes on the face of the report, CMMC had been landfill in a nearby township to dump toxic coal cleaning fluid waste over a considerable period of time. The report stated that locating a new dump site was urgent because of the current one was nearing capacity. Romanov realized that it was possible CMMC had been improperly disposing of toxic fluids in a landfill that was restricted to residential refuse. Besides the obvious hazards to residents of the area, there could be legal problems if and when the authorities were notified. The financial consequences of cleanup actions, as well as the loss of CMMC's generally good environmental reputation, this could be catastrophic for the company. Romanov asked his supervisor how this item was to be included in the footnotes, and also inquired whether an accrual for cleanup costs was anticipated. His supervisor told him to, quote, forget about this matter, and that he had no intention of mentioning one word about waste disposal in this year's financial statements. The next section of our first sample essay is the questions. Remember that there are typically 4 to 7 questions per scenario or per essay. Due to time constraints with our webinar today, we're just going to show 3 questions associated with this essay problem. We will review these questions and provide sample responses in the next few slides. As I read these questions, I will emphasize the words that we need to focus on when providing our response. Question 1 states, using the categories outlined in the IMA's Standard of Ethical Professional Practice, identify the standards that are specifically relevant to Alex Romanov's ethical conflict and explain why the standards are applicable to the situation. Question 2 says, according to the IMA Standard of Ethical Professional Practice, what further steps, if any, should Romanov take in resolving this ethical matter? And question 3 says, if he continues to be rebuffed by his employer, should Romanov notify appropriate authorities? Should he anonymously release the information to local newspapers? And then we are to finish answering these essays by explaining our answers. At the top of this slide, we note question 1 for your reference with our sample response to question 1, and that's going to follow immediately after. So once again, question 1 states, using the categories outlined in IMA's statement, Standards of Ethical Professional Practice, identify the standards that are specifically relevant to Alex Romanov's ethical conflict, and then explain why the standards are applicable to that situation. We are to provide our responses in a neat format so that the essay graders will have the opportunity to see our response quickly. However, remember that the ability to show effects like bold and underline are not going to be available in the word processing tool at Prometric. So here is our sample response. The standards of IMA's Statement of Ethical Professional Practice that specifically relate to Alex Romanov and the situation at Carroll Mining and Manufacturing are the following: competence, confidentiality, integrity, and credibility. Under competence, we note that we're going to state what the standard is, and then we'll apply it to this situation. It says, perform professional duties in accordance with relevant laws, regulations, and technical standards, and then explain it to the situation. It appears that CMMC is not in compliance with the relevant laws and regulations regarding the dumping of toxic materials. At a minimum, Romanov has an obligation to report the situation to higher authorities within the company. And then under confidentiality, we note the standard first, and then we apply it to the situation. Keep information confidential except when disclosure is authorized or legally required. So this standard may or may not relate to the CMMC situation, depending on the requirements of the environmental regulations in effect in the jurisdiction where CMMC is operating. Romanov may be required by law to disclose the information. Finishing up our response for question 1, we now expand upon integrity and credibility. We will continue using the approach as we did with competence and confidentiality, which is once again to state the standard, define the standard, and then explain why the standards are applicable to the situation. By following this approach, we are given those essay graders the greatest opportunity to give us as many points as possible. And another point worth mentioning is that although we want to be sure to offer all relevant data, we also want to remain clear and concise. So here's our remaining sample response for question 1. Under integrity, we say, refrain from engaging in any conduct that would prejudice carrying out duties ethically. Abstain from engaging in or supporting any activity that might discredit the profession. If Romanov does not report the apparent illegal dumping to those in authority at CMMC, his behavior would not be considered ethical under these standards, and his lack of action would discredit the profession. Under credibility, we need to communicate information fairly and objectively. We have to provide all relevant information that could reasonably be expected to influence the intended user's understanding of the reports, analysis, or recommendations. We are to report any delays or deficiencies in information, timeliness, processing, or internal controls in conformance with the organization policy and or applicable law. All of these standards make it clear that Romanov has an obligation to act objectively in this matter and report the situation to those in authority at CMMC. Let's move on to question 2 now of this essay. And question 2 states, according to the IMA Standards of Ethical Professional Practice, what further steps, if any, should Romanov take in resolving this ethical dilemma? Initially, Romanov should follow CMMC's policy regarding the resolution of an ethical conflict. So always go to your company's ethical standards. They should have it written. It should be available to you. That's always going to be your first step. However, if there is no policy or the policy does not resolve the issue, he should consider the courses of action that is recommended in IMA's Statement of Ethical Professional Practice. Since Romanov's immediate supervisor appears to be involved in the dumping situation, he should submit the issue to the next higher level. If the situation is not satisfactorily resolved, Romanov should approach successive levels of authority. For example, the CFO, the audit committee, and then, if need be, the board of directors. He can also contact an IMA ethics counselor or other impartial advisor to discuss possible courses of action. Romanov should consult an attorney regarding his legal obligations and rights in this ethical conflict. So on the next slide, we're going to conclude with a sample response for question 3. Question 3 states, If he continues to be rebuffed by his employer, should Romanov notify the appropriate authorities? Should he anonymously release the information to the local newspaper? And then we need to explain our answers. When we go through the sample response for question 3, please note that the entire requirement is not fulfilled until we explain our answers. So here's our sample response. It is not considered appropriate for Romanov to inform authorities or individuals not employed or engaged by CMMC unless he believes there's a clear violation of the law. In discussions with his attorney, Romanov should clarify his obligations under the law. If CMMC does not take action after Romanov has informed the appropriate in-house authorities, he may be obligated to inform the regulatory agency involved. He should not, under any circumstance, anonymously release the information to the local newspaper or any other social media outlet. Remember that I'm only covering 3 of the questions in this essay problem, but you could expect to see between 4 and 7 questions for each problem or each essay. I'd also like to mention that some essays will be testing your knowledge of IMA's ethics as well as another topic, such as budgeting or financial reporting. The essay we just covered does, however, focus exclusively on ethics. So now that we've walked through an example of a qualitative question, let's look at another essay example that requires some quantitative responses. The second essay problem we will be covering will include mathematical calculations. However, our approach to answering the essay remains the same. So let's review those suggested steps. We're going to skim the scenario. We're going to look at the question so we can really hone in on what we have to answer. Then we're going to go back through the scenario and we're going to reread it, noting the information that is relevant to answering the questions. And then number 4, thoroughly yet concisely answer those questions. So let's take a look at this scenario now for the sample essay number 2. The city of Blackston owns and operates a community swimming pool. The pool is open each year for 90 days during the summer months of June, July, and August. A daily admission is charged to patrons of the pool. By law, 10% of all recreational and sporting fees must be remitted to a state tourism promotion fund. The city manager has set a goal of pool admission revenue after subtracting the state fee and variable cost must be sufficient to cover the fixed cost. Variable costs are assumed to be 15% of gross revenue, and the fixed costs for the 3-month period total $33,000. The following budget for the pool has been prepared for the current year. So we can see we have 2 types of admissions in this budget. We have adult admissions and we have student admissions. Under these assumptions for the budget, we're saying that we have 30 adults per day and we're charging the adults $5 per day, and we're assuming that's going to be consistent every day of these summer months. For the student admissions, there's going to be 120 students per day, and we're only charging them $2.50 per student each day for those 90 days. And you can see that this budget extends these out to dollarize the revenue. So once we add together the adult admissions and the student admissions, we're at a gross or total revenue of $40,500. Of course, we have to pay our state tourism fee first, so we're going to take that variable cost out, and then we get down to our net revenue. The other variable costs are consisting of the 15% of variable cost, or 15% of gross revenue that was stated earlier, and so that 15% is going to be 15% of the $40,500. And then lastly, in this calculation, you can see that the fixed cost of $33,000 for these 3 months of $33,000 is taken out, and we are left with a deficit of $2,625. The city manager is trying to determine what admission mix is necessary to break even and what actions could be taken to eliminate the expected deficit. In the second sample essay, there are 4 questions. In order to assure that we do not omit any specific question, because we all know that we get nervous and we just want to kind of be done with it, I suggest setting up an outline so that you don't forget to answer one of these questions. So just right away in the Prometric site, number 1, 2, 3, 4, so you know, I'm not done when I'm finished question number 2. I do have to do question number 3 and 4 as well. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at these questions. So the first question says, given the anticipated mix of adult and student admissions, how many total admissions must the pool have in order to break even for the season? So at a bare minimum, how much money do they need to gross in order to cover all their variable costs and their fixed costs? And then regardless of the admission mix in question number 2, they're saying what is the highest number of admissions that would be necessary to break even for the season. So taking the different contribution margins into account, we determine which one we would use and answer that question. And question 3 is very similar to that as well, but it's taken the opposite approach. It says, regardless of the admission mix, what is the lowest number of admissions that would be necessary to break even for the season? And then question number 4 says, the city manager is considering several pricing strategies that could increase the admission fees at the swimming pool. One of the pricing strategies being considered is product mix pricing. We are to define product mix pricing and discuss how this approach could eliminate the expected deficit or could help us. We're going to approach this question in the same manner as we did for the questions in sample essay number 1. To begin, I would like to clarify that we do not suggest that you rewrite the question before you show your solution. We're only doing that for our purposes of this webinar, just so you can clearly see what the question is. So let's look at the question in more detail. Given the anticipated mix of adult and student admissions, how many total admissions must the pool have in order to break even for the season? So before we're able to answer this question, we must be clear as to what is being asked. In this essay, there are 2 components that we have to consider. 1, the question is asking for the number of admissions that are required to break even. And 2, the second component is that there are 2 types of services. Remember, we have an adult admission as well as a student admission. Therefore, there's going to be a mixed component that we have to keep in mind. The first step is going to be to calculate the contribution margin percentage in total. Contribution margin is calculated by taking revenue less all variable costs. And in this example, the variable costs are both the 10% state tourism fee of $4,050, as well as the stated variable cost of $6,075. Therefore, our contribution margin is $30,375. So to calculate contribution margin percentage, we divide that contribution margin of $30,375 by our gross revenue, and we get a contribution margin of 75%. We apply this contribution margin percentage to the admission price of the adult, and then we do it again. We apply that contribution margin percent to the admission price of a student. Therefore, the contribution margin for adult admissions is $5, which is the revenue that we're generating from each adult, and then we multiply it by the 75%. And essentially what we're saying is that after we cover all our variable expenses, we're earning $3.75 per adult admission. We do the same thing for the students, and we multiply the charge that we're charging our students of $2.50 times 75%, and we get $1.875 per student. Next, we're going to look at the mix. So we know the mix of adults to students because we were given the budget, which is the anticipated mix. Taking the proportion of anticipated adult admissions to the student, admissions will allow us to weight the contribution margin. Since 30 of the 150 admissions anticipated are adult admissions, and the remaining 120 out of the 150 are student admissions, we have a weighting of 20% adult and 80% students. The next step is to calculate the weighted average contribution margin. By applying that mix, 20% for adults and 80% for students, to each of the contribution margins, we get a weighting of $2.25. So once again, we would multiply the contribution margin of $3.75 times the mix for the adults, and then we would multiply the 80% times the 1.875 per students, add those together to get a weighted average contribution margin of $2.25. Now, the final step is the easiest step. This is the one that we learn right away when we don't have a mix. And the final step is to determine the break even. We're going to divide those fixed costs of $33,000 by the weighted average contribution margin, which we already calculated to be $2.25. So we arrive at a break-even point of 14,667 admissions per season. So in order to just cover our variable costs and our fixed costs, we need to have 14,667 admissions for the season. Question 2 of our second essay is asking a more straightforward question by omitting the mix component that we saw with question 1. The question states, regardless of the admission mix, what is the highest number of admissions that would be necessary to break even for the season? For this question, we only need to cover the fixed cost, with the lower of the two contribution margins. And in this case, the contribution margin for the students is only $1.875 per student versus the adult contribution of $375. Therefore, we're going to divide the $33,000 of fixed cost by the contribution margin for our students, and the maximum number of admissions that we would need is 17,600 for the season. That's assuming that they're all students. Question 3 goes on, and they ask a similar question than what we saw in question number 2, but now it's flipped. Regardless of the admission mix, what is the lowest number of admissions that would be necessary to break even for the season? Now we're looking at the number of admissions that correspond with the highest contribution margin, which is the adult contribution margin of $3.75. Divide the $33,000 fixed cost by $3.75 for the contribution per adult, and we get the minimum number of admissions required to break even, which would be 8,800 per season. And then the final question to essay number 2 is question 4. Remember, there are 4 sub-questions to question number 4. Question 4 states, the city manager is considering several pricing strategies that could increase the admissions fees at the pool. One of the pricing strategies being considered is something called product mix pricing. We are to define product mix pricing and discuss how this approach could help eliminate the expected deficit. When we begin answering this question, you might be inclined, as I typically am, to start calculating, because that's what we do as accountants. But remember, we need to stick to what the question is asking us. This question is simply asking us to state what is product mix pricing, and then discuss how it could be applied to this situation to eliminate that deficit. And once again, you're not going to receive extra points if you do go ahead and calculate. So don't use your time to calculate something when it's not being asked to be calculated. So under our sample response for question 4, under product mix pricing, the price is set low for some products or segments in the hope that it will attract others. If it is found that adults are usually accompanied by students, attempts could be made to find the mix of adult student prices that brings in the most patrons. Now that we reviewed 2 sample essay problems, let's revisit some of the tips that Mitra provided earlier. Remember that you want to be as thorough as possible with your response. Show your calculations, if applicable, and provide a detailed response. And don't leave any of the questions blank. Provide responses that will allow the graders to award you partial credit if possible. And be sure to show all of your work. So when the CMA graders evaluate your responses, they're looking to give you points. And if you provide a very thorough response, you'll receive the maximum number of points for that question. If your response is less than complete, you might receive partial credit for your answer. All right, so let's move on to the steps to becoming a CMA, because this is what we're going to need to do first before we're permitted to tackle these essay questions. So in order to become a CMA, you have to pass the 2 exam parts, as well as fulfill education and work experience requirements. Candidates are not required to already have earned their degree in order to sit for the CMA, which makes the CMA exam something that's very interesting to undergraduate students. Students can sit for the CMA prior to graduation with their undergraduate degree. Candidates just need to complete their degree within 7 years of passing the CMA parts and submit their university transcripts to the IMA. And as for work experience requirement, candidates need to complete 2 years of professional work experience in order to become a CMA. And throughout this whole process, it's going to definitely benefit you to be an active member in the IMA. The exam is computer-based and administered by Prometric Testing, where you can take it on-site at a Prometric Testing Center, and there are hundreds of locations across the globe, and as of just a few months ago, there is now a remote testing option where you can take it from the convenience of your home using your own personal computer. Please visit the Prometric website to learn the rules you must follow to take advantage of this option, and each physical location has slightly different policies, so you'll want to look into that as well. For the CMA exam, there are 3 testing windows that are offered each year. These are the only months when the CMA exam can be taken. Remember, parts 1 and 2 can be taken in either order. You can start with 2 and then go back to 1, or you can go 1, 2. And from the time you enter the CMA program, you have 3 years to complete both parts, but most candidates take less than half that time. To get started, the first step is to join the IMA. To pursue the CMA, the next step is to declare yourself as a CMA candidate. You do that by paying the CMA program entrance fees. Finally, once you're ready to sit for the exam, you will register for a specific exam part in a specific testing window and pay the exam part fee. And you can see that those updated fees are listed on our slide. So the membership is $260 plus a $15 one-time fee. The CMA exam entrance fee is separate, so keep that in mind. And then when you go to register for the exam part, it's going to be $460 per part. I'd like to share an important resource for CMA candidates, the CMA Candidate Handbook, which is available on the IMA website. It's the go-to resource for all prospective CMA candidates. It provides you with information on the requirements for certification, registration, scheduling procedures, and an explanation of the examination process. And you can find that at imanet.org. So in conclusion, I hope you found this information and these techniques helpful on how to approach the essays for the CMA exam. Remember, this is your time to shine. Show those essay graders that you indeed have a mastery of the CMA exam topics and can apply your knowledge of management accounting. Best of luck to you on the CMA exam. And now I'm going to turn your attention to our moderators so that we can answer some of the audience questions.
Well, thank you, Mitra, Catherine, and Sue. This was a lot of great information. Attendees should see the evaluation survey now open on your screen. If it did not open, please click the evaluation survey icon at the bottom of your screen for access. We appreciate your feedback, so please complete the survey while we address some of the questions, some of the audience questions. Let me remind participants to send us your questions and comments by typing them into the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. So the first question I have, and we got this one quite a few times, was how many questions should I expect to have for each of the essay scenarios? And I don't know who wants to take that.
Hi, Tyler. It's Lisa Bowden with IMA. The answer to that question is that each essay problem can have between 4 and 7 questions. So when you go into the essay portion of the exam, you can scroll between the two problems to see what topics are being covered, and you can scroll between the questions as well, maybe even make some notes along the way to refer back to when you start to answer those questions. So the answer is 4 to 7 questions for each of the 2 essay problems.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And I think I have another question. This one's probably more for Sue and Catherine. So one thing that came up again quite a bit was some of the candidates find the essay questions very intimidating. So do you have any advice to help maybe calm their nerves or give them the confidence to tackle these problems? And then Sue, if you want to maybe start first.
Absolutely. I love this question. As I teach my MBA CMA review course, we spend a lot of time on those multiple choice questions. And I tell my students, by the time you've mastered those multiple choice questions, you're ready for the essays. You just need to be able to consolidate your thoughts to be clear and concise and make sure that you're putting the relevant information there for those essay graders. And I think that really lends most of the students to feel kind of confident going into it. And then the feedback that I've received, and it worked for me as well, is I really, once I felt like I was really comfortable with the material, I didn't really get nervous about the essay questions, and it served me well. So perhaps Catherine has a different perspective on that, but I feel like once you've studied and you've mastered those multiple choice questions, you're in really good shape to answer the essay questions too.
Yes, I agree. I'm not sure about others, but I feel calmer after I can see that the exam kind of moved me to the essay, because like, yes, I already get more than 50%, so it's good. And I think for me, it would be similar tips that when you take the multiple choice questions, meaning I read the questions, take 1 minute to understand exactly what are the objectives, what are they asking me, and then I go back to the essay and I read to kind of like skim through and see which details do I need and which one I don't. So that's what I do.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an important point, especially This can be very nerve-wracking for some, so they want to try to get through as quickly as possible, but I think that's a good piece of advice to just make sure you understand the question fully.
Yes.
Another question, are you able to navigate back and forth between the essay questions, or do you need to stick with one, complete that, and then move on to the other?
You can. You can navigate between the two major essay questions within the essay part. Yes.
And Catherine, I have another one.
Chime in.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Tyler. I know some folks wanted to see the screenshot again of what the exam looks like with the question pane and the scenario and the text box. And I just want to ensure that everyone who has attended today's webinar or registered for it will get a recording of this presentation afterwards. So you can definitely reference it in the future.
Thanks, Mitra. And Catherine, you touched upon this a little bit, but what did your study schedule look like? And I know everyone has different things going on in their life and everyone's study schedule looks different, but could you touch upon, were you studying every single day, a couple times a week? Did you spend multiple hours at a time, or did you break it up? Can you kind of go through your study process just to give the others on the call an idea?
Yes, of course. So as we have mentioned, right, most of the study guide would kind of tell you the estimate time that you would need, like 150 hours or so. So what I do is I prepare a schedule that I try to be realistic to what I actually can sit down, and also make sure that I maintain my responsibilities at my real job, right? So I schedule sort of like 3 nights a week, and then 2 nights on the weekend. So that's total about 5 days a week that I study. And if during month end close, when I'm really busy, and if I kind of like slip off, then I try to make up the following night. And just so you know, because I work for a global company, so the majority of the morning, I cannot do anything else. Like some of my conference calls started at 7 a.m. in the morning, and I need like half an hour sometime to prepare. It means I get up at 5:30, 6 o'clock. So the only time that I can study is at night. And again, because of my workload, so sometimes I cannot sit down to start study until like 10 p.m. And I will study until like around midnight. And being a stubborn person myself, if I do not get to my goal of trying to like 1.5 minutes per questions, I would sit until I'm done, meaning I would study until like 1:30 in the morning, just to get that 1.5 minutes per question, multiple choice questions. Yes.
Great, thank you. Well, it sounds like you have to have a lot of flexibility, and then it really comes down to time management and being disciplined and making sure that you're studying. Well, I think that's all we have for today as far as our time, so I'm going to turn it back over to Margaret to finish up.
Thank you, Tyler. At this time, I'd like to thank our presenters, Mitra Kleinberg, Catherine Crum, and Sue Mullen, for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us. We're very appreciative that they've made time for IMA and for our audience today. And also, thank you, Tyler Skelton, for moderating today's event. Share your knowledge and expertise with the IMA community at IMA's Accounting and Finance Conference, taking place June 11th through the 14th, 2023 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The deadline to submit is Friday, August 26th of 2022. Please visit www.imaconference.org for more information and to submit your proposal. I want to again thank Glein CMA Review for sponsoring today's webinar, and thank all of you for your participation in today's event, your commitment to IMA, and your professional development through IMA's CMA Candidate Webinar Series. I look forward to spending time with you again soon, when we'll enjoy some more valuable and beneficial information through the IMA webinars.